Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Welcome to Capitol Preview. I'm Bill Peard, the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunication Association. Capitol Preview is a show where we discuss issues that are important to Iowa. Our guest this morning is House Democratic Minority Leader Mark Smith. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Bill. It's nice to be here.
It's good to have you. So we're just going to jump in. We got a long show today and to talk about a lot of different things that are on your plate, on Iowa, on the state House plate, and in Iowa in general. So we'll just kind of jump in, and I appreciate you coming in this morning. Democrats have unveiled their agenda for 2018 called Putting Iowas First. Can you give me an overview of what that means?
Thank you, Bill. This was a press conference that we had last week. We've been working on this for quite a while, and Senator Peterson, who's my counterpart in the Iowa Senate, and I stood in one of the rooms of the State House and had most of the members of our caucuses there present as we outlined this. First of all, it's an idea of getting back to the basics, that we feel that everyday Iowans are not getting the return for the tax dollars that they're paying. And so there are some areas here that we think are very important for Iowa. The first one is, of course, job creation. That we know that about 70% of jobs in Iowa require some training beyond high school, but not necessarily at the 4-year level. And so that means that we have to have a strong pre-K all the way through advanced training here in Iowa in order to meet the needs of Iowans who, A, want to improve their lives and devote more to their communities, and also what Iowa employers want in terms of a good workforce here in Iowa that has the training that is needed. The second thing that we think is important is revitalizing rural Iowa. That we have 70 of the 99 counties here in this state that have had a reduction in population. And so we've seen more of an urbanization. We've also moved, Bill, to a state where 1/3 of Iowans live west of Interstate 35 and 2/3 live east of Interstate 35. This is an enormous problem for us as we go forward. Our school districts in western Iowa and lots of places in eastern Iowa have gone to where they now are busing students as far as they possibly can, or the amount of time for those students to ride on the buses. So good paying jobs, revitalizing rural Iowa. The third one is, I think that goes hand in hand with both the other two, is a strong public school system here, that we need Iowans to have the best education possible. They have to compete in a global economy. We have in the past been first or second in the nation in education here, and that is going by the wayside here in our state. So we want to push back to have a strong public education system. The last one is to make Iowa the best place in the nation to live. You know, other states have mountains, they have coastlines, those kinds of things that attract people to move to those states. But we have good quality of life here. We have good paying, our cost of living is less here in the state of Iowa. And so we need those quality of life things, the things that improve our communities, have attractions that attract people to come to Iowa, Iowans to stay in Iowa, and for the long-term employment here in our state.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to ask a couple questions based on that.
Yeah.
So, Mark, how do you, what do you attribute the rural loss of population to versus the urban? I know that's the migration they're going towards, but what caused this?
Well, there are several things. Yes, there are several things that have caused this. One has been, I think, your business, that communication, and the fact that we've had more availability of communication here in our state. The Batelli study that was done several years ago here in Iowa talked about that our growth would be in advanced manufacturing, That's brought more people away from our rural areas into our cities, that we have information technology, and that we have improvement in the life sciences. So all of those things, which have been good for the growth of Iowa, though haven't been good for pockets of Iowa. And so if we increase the availability of communication in rural Iowa, we know now that there are a number of jobs where people can work at home at least part of the time that they're doing their job. So it won't matter so much where people live if we start improving the communication in rural Iowa. Then I think the advanced manufacturing and life sciences, we also need to move those out in order to resolve that conflict.
You know, Iowa's a great state. It's got lots and lots of good stuff going for it. So it's frustrating. I'm sure it's frustrating to you, right? To see our population dwindle.
Yes, and we have had some improvement in our population. We just haven't grown at the level that other states have.
Okay.
And so that's been the challenge for us, how we then grow. And unfortunately, in too many areas, we have provided the educated people that other states have needed. So after we get that final degree for our students, bringing them to stay here in Iowa, I think is our challenge.
Yeah. We got a great state. We got lots of good things going, so I'm sure we'll get that done.
That's right.
The privatization of Medicaid has been a tough process. Is it time that the Medicaid privatization can be fixed or needs to be fixed?
Well, I've been known to call it a mess, and today I'll call it one hell of a mess. That this has been an absolute horrible rollout of the program. We know that other states took a great deal more time in rolling out the program, making sure that they had the bugs worked out of it before they rolled out the program. I've joined with most other members of my caucus in both the House and Senate in calling to going back to the old fee-for-service program that was administered by the Iowa Medicaid Exchange Program. That wasn't always pretty, but it worked fairly effectively here in our state. So this is a mess that the governor in her State of the State address said that she would fix. Let's keep in mind that it was the Branstad-Reynolds administration that rolled this thing out and rolled it out with without proper working through those kinds of issues that should have been worked through so it would be better for Iowa people. Let's correct it before more Iowans die.
How soon do you think, if she, because I know she said that in her State of the State address, how long do you think that will take to correct this thing?
Well, we're entering the fourth week of the legislature. She said very adamantly that those problems would be fixed. We haven't seen anything to indicate that that indeed is happening.
Yeah, it's a mess. I agree with you, and it's sad that it's happening the way it is.
It is. This is a program that affects most of the most vulnerable Iowans in our state.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't be that way.
Right. Senate Republicans plan to make a $52 million $52 million in budget cuts this year due to the overspending. What impact will that have on Iowa, and how can that situation be avoided?
Well, I think that this is going to be an ugly week in the legislature, Bill, because that bill was rolled out at the last of the week, and it is a cut deeper than what is anticipated that needs to be cut. Let's keep in mind that the economic emergency funds that we have available to us were tapped into 2 times before this time. One was right after 9/11 occurred. The second occurred during the Great Recession. Now we're tapping into these funds at a time when Iowa's economy is actually growing. And there needs to be a stop of blaming this on the Democrats. The Republicans control the House and Senate and the governor's office. They are responsible for this mess that they've gotten the budget in, and for all of the adjustments and taking out of emergency funds that occurred in 2017. So as we go through this, they say that they're going to hold public education harmless. That's based on the numbers of underfunding of those services already. So it's not holding it harmless. What they're proposing on the Senate side is affecting our community colleges in an extremely negative manner. And back to the job creation, these are the folks that create the jobs for Iowans and the jobs that employers want. And so that falls into a very serious cut on what we need for workforce development here in our state.
Absolutely. Another big issue at the Iowa State House is the controversial water quality bill that was passed last week. Will that bill actually improve water quality, and is there more the legislature could do for the water quality this year?
I think both sides are admitting that there is more that could be done. There were two bills that went through the House of Representatives. First was the Senate version. Second was the House version. The House version had more accountability to it, and the funding mechanism for it, though not perfect, was a better funding mechanism. And so I supported both last year and this year the House version, which I think would improve this serious issue that we have here in Iowa. The Senate version actually passed. I think we will have a bill signing by the governor this week and lots of lauding that this is a good thing. And I think there are some improvements in water quality in it, not nearly enough to correct the serious problem that we have in our state. There was commitment from the floor manager, John Wills, when this was passed in the House to do more during this session. So let's look at that. Let's hope that, in fact, more is going to be done. If I may, I'll go a little bit further on this issue.
Absolutely, because I think this is very, very important to Iowans regardless. Right?
It is a very important issue. And I think that we should stop talking about water quality. And what we should be talking about is soil health in our state. Mm-hmm. That in the 20th century, we lost about half of our topsoil here in our state. Our ability...
That is a staggering number, by the way.
Isn't that a staggering number to see?
Consider we're an agricultural state.
That's right. And so the value is in the farmland. Our obligation, when there is starvation that occurs in our world, our obligation to use that good soil, no coastlines, no mountains, but the ability to feed the world, we need to take that very seriously. We need to protect our soil. I don't know any farmer who isn't interested in protecting their soil. Mm-hmm. And if we do that, then we correct the water quality problem. Good soil prevents us from having flooding. It prevents us from having materials leave that soil and enter the water stream. And I think we certainly have much more buy-in from farmers. My mother is a farmer. She wants to pass that farmland down through generations. Mm-hmm. I don't know any farmer who doesn't want to do that.
Absolutely, because I mean that's what makes Iowa, Iowa, right? When we start losing that, then we've got big issues.
That's right. And I think that with that comes the ideas of diversification. This is a Florida story, but it could easily be an Iowa story. Once my wife and I flew to Florida, we stopped after we got the rental car. She stopped to get something and she said, "Do you want something from the store while I run in?" And I said, "Yes, an orange, we're in Florida." When she came back out, it had California stamped on it.
They had to import the oranges from California.
That's some of the ridiculousness that we have the ability to produce lots of our food here that we aren't producing, and that helps with soil health as well.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, too. The $1.75 million sexual harassment settlement against the Senate Republicans was a black eye for the state of Iowa. How do we prevent actions like that from happening in the future?
Well, first of all, I don't think that the taxpayers of Iowa should pay for this. And if you haven't done it, or if any of the listeners haven't done it, they should read the testimony from the court proceedings there. What occurred was absolutely appalling. And I know that Ambassador Kramer, who's been hired by the Senate, not by the House, to do work on this issue, will be on a news program today, or on Monday, talking about these issues.
Yeah.
So I think that the first step is education. I'm a licensed independent social worker by training, and a generation ahead of me, you saw lots of sexual inappropriateness between therapists and their patients. We started requiring that people take 3 hours worth of ethics training every 2 years to keep their license. And we now have moved to the lowest profession in having sexual inappropriateness with the people we serve. And most of the people that in my profession, the biggest reason they get in trouble is not completing their continuing education.
Right.
Now, I want them to complete their continuing education, but comparing that to being sexually inappropriate, this is a much better problem to have. So we've started training. And there was, on the part of the speaker, a desire to have us complete the Department of Administrative Services training, which we have completed. It was a 30-minute training program online. I did not like it because you could skip forward and complete the certificate without participating in the training. So I pressed, and we had the Iowa Civil Rights Commission come in and provide training to the House Democratic Caucus for an hour and go more in depth on these issues. Because we chose to do it with the Democratic Caucus, the Republican Caucus in the House did the same.
That's good.
It is very good. And our intention is to continue making sure that everyone participates in that training every 2 years. I think that's the initial step for us. The second step is to adopt no tolerance of this. It has no place in the workforce. It has clearly no place for elected officials doing this. And the third thing is it's something that the Iowa taxpayers should not have to pay for.
Absolutely. How do you go about adopting that? Would it be a legislative move to make that adoption, or?
Yes, if we were to change how the payout of something like that would occur,
Right.
It would have to take legislation.
Okay, all right, very good. What do you think? What kind of things do you think are what? I'm sorry, I'll start over again. What kind of other legislation do you think is going to go forward in this session? I know it's a short session because it's year 2 of the biannual.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a short session.
Yeah, in theory, yeah.
You're looking at someone who participated in the second longest session in Iowa's history, and also, I believe, the shortest session in Iowa's history. So it's, I always say it's a little bit like a fellow I once said to him, they say it's going to be a bad winter, and he said, I'm 77. They've been saying that for 70 years, and most of the time they're right. It usually goes a little bit longer than anticipated. So hopefully we're going to get out of there in mid-April. But there are quite a few pieces of legislation going on. And Bill, I think it's important for people to think in terms of, in the initial stages of the legislature, usually January, first part of February, it's the introduction of bills.
Yeah.
And that most of the activity is going to be in subcommittees at that point. And then it will go to committee action, and then it goes to floor debate. So the only floor debate we have had so far in the month of January has been the water quality bill to move that down to the governor. Now, the subcommittee is the area that gets probably the least amount of attention, but is probably the most important. The average person, everyday Iowans, can come and attend subcommittees. So they go on the website every morning and go to www.legis.iowa.gov, all lowercase, and they will see the number of subcommittees that are meeting that particular day, and then they can come to those committees. Now, the reason why it's important for them to come is they can also speak to the bill. This is the major opportunity that people have to speak to the bill. So there are some subcommittees this week that I think may be controversial. One, there's going to be a subcommittee on the death penalty, reinstating that here in Iowa, and I would anticipate that there will be a packed crowd for that subcommittee. There also will be a subcommittee that addresses Bible teaching or the study of the Bible in public schools, and that I also think will be a controversial subcommittee as well. And the third one is that there will be a subcommittee on sanctuary cities here in Iowa, and so people will have an opportunity to weigh in on that issue as well.
Hey, Mark, will you take a few seconds and kind of explain sanctuary cities? Because
Sure.
A lot of people hear about it, but I don't know if they truly understand what it means.
It's an anti-sanctuary city bill, and it has to do with the issue of immigration and people being in the United States with undocumented status. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to talk with one of my constituents who was brought to the United States when she was 3 years of age. So there are the DACA recipients, or those that are working on a path to citizenship. So the anti-sanctuary cities legislation would require the local law enforcement officials to implement the federal law enforcement of immigration and naturalization services. There's a considerable amount of concern that these officers aren't trained in this regard. There's considerable amount of concern about it being an unfunded mandate.
We're kind of jumping back and forth,
Sure.
but I think that's an interesting thing in how involved immigration issues are in this country right now, how they're at the front of a lot of discussion, politically and otherwise. So.
They are. This is a very polarizing issue here in the United States, and has been for a while. And the issue, I think, moves down to the states because the federal government hasn't taken the action. And even this week, with the DACA program scheduled to expire, we're not seeing whether they are going to resolve this issue on a federal level or not.
Yeah. More to come, right?
Yes.
Locally or statewide, we have caucuses coming up, and I believe those are next Monday, February the 5th.
That's
what's
right.
your role in the caucuses?
Well, you know that I always like history here.
Oh, yeah.
So the first caucuses in Iowa were in 1968, and they fell into this first in the nation status really by accident. It was calculating out what was needed for the caucuses and then moving to the county conventions, moving to the district conventions, and moving to the state conventions. So they fell into this being first in the nation. This is an off-year caucus, and so it'll be probably lower attendance. It shouldn't be,
right.
But it probably will be lower attendance, and there won't be the choice of presidential candidates, nor will there be the choice of the gubernatorial candidates, although I'm sure that they will be promoting their campaigns at the caucuses. But this is an absolutely marvelous effort at democracy and plain old-fashioned neighbors getting together, developing platforms, developing how their political party stands on issues, and promoting their candidacy. So if people haven't participated in their caucus, I certainly encourage them to do so. In order for legislators to participate in them, I'm very thankful that the Speaker has said no action on Monday, the day of the caucuses, and that we'll gavel in then Tuesday of that week.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think they're important whether it's a presidential year or not, because especially for the people that are just getting involved with them, it helps them, right? Because it's not as intense as the presidential
That's
caucuses
right.
are.
Yes, it is. In smaller crowds, you can talk, I think, very openly about issues. And I said the first ones were in 1968, and I'm old enough that I didn't participate in those, but I did participate in the second presidential caucuses in 1972. And it's been amazing to watch them grow and develop over the years.
I was
as
going to
well.
ask you, do you prefer the old way of doing the primaries and then the general election, or the caucuses?
I like our Iowa system. I like the caucus system that
The
we have,
interaction.
and then the primaries that we have for non-presidentials that in June, I think, is it June 5th, I believe,
Right.
is the primary elections
Right.
that we have, and
For,
at that time we'll be serving or determining our gubernatorial candidates and other candidates for public office.
And speaking of that, Mark, we're going to roll right into the governor's race. Why don't you give me, if you can, a few minutes, your opinion of the gubernatorial race and where you see this thing going?
Well, on the Democratic side, I like them all.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm undeclared in the Democratic side.
Which
and-
you have to be almost, right? Because of your leadership role.
Well, it is important, but I also am torn with this because they are just simply great candidates out there.
Yeah.
And they came to my barbecue this past summer. They come to events across the state. And so it's very energizing to hear them speak and to hear the message that they are promoting. And I think the same is true on the Republican side, that this is the first time in a long time that we haven't had Governor Branstad on the ballot.
Yeah.
And so Mayor Corbett and Governor Reynolds having a race there, I think it energizes the base when we have candidates on both sides of the aisle that are promoting different viewpoints.
Yeah. Okay, well, that kind of wraps up our show for today. We're out of time. I appreciate very much Mark Smith, House Minority Leader, Democratic Minority Leader from District 71, Marshalltown, Albion, Liscombe, and Green Mountain. So
Thanks.
again, we appreciate very much you being here, and please join us again for Capitol Preview. Thanks, Mark.